stop what you're doing for a moment. Because what you're about to hear isn't speculation, it isn't a simulation, and it isn't the kind of geopolitical noise that fades by morning. In the last 48 hours, something has happened that has no modern comparison. A single decision has shifted the balance of global power so dramatically that governments across the world are now in emergency sessions, not because they don't understand what happened, but because they do, and they can't find a safe response. Russia has transferred 1,000 RS-28 Sarmat nuclear missiles to Iran. Not a symbolic number, not a limited deployment, but 1,000 of the most destructive weapons ever built. Say that number slowly and let it register. Each of these missiles carries enough power to erase entire nations. Each one travels at speeds and along paths that current defense systems were never designed to stop. And now, all of them are positioned inside hardened Iranian facilities aimed outward at a world that is no longer protected by the assumptions it once relied on. The RS-28 Sarmat, known in NATO terminology as Satan II, is not just another missile system. It was specifically engineered to defeat every layer of modern missile defense. With a range of approximately 18,000 kilometers and the ability to carry up to 15 independently targetable nuclear warheads, a single missile can strike multiple targets across vast distances. More importantly, it can approach those targets from unexpected directions, including routes that bypass decades of carefully positioned early warning systems. This matters because the global defense architecture, particularly that of the United States and its allies, was built on certain predictable patterns. The Sarmat was designed to break those patterns completely. It ensures that no interceptor system, no experimental technology, and no classified defense project can reliably stop it once launched. That was its purpose from the beginning. And now, that capability has been handed over in massive numbers. To understand the scale of this shift, the numbers need context. The United States currently maintains around 1,500 deployed strategic nuclear warheads across its land-based missiles, submarines, and bomber fleets combined. In contrast, 1,000 Sarmat missiles, each carrying multiple warheads, could theoretically deliver up to 15,000 nuclear payloads. That is not just an increase, it is a transformation of the strategic landscape. Within 6 hours of confirming the transfer, Israel responded with a message that was brief but unmistakable. Iran has 48 hours to stand down or face total destruction. 11 words, delivered without emotion, but carrying the weight of a nation confronting an existential threat unlike anything it has faced before. Behind those words lies a calculation that has no easy answer. Because Israel's existing deterrence, powerful as it is, was never designed to counter something of this scale. At the same time, Washington received confirmation in the early hours of the morning. The response was immediate, the president was informed, and the National Security Council was assembled within minutes. Yet, for the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, the leadership of the United States found itself confronting a situation where every available option carried the risk of catastrophic escalation. There was no clear path that did not lead toward consequences on a global scale. What follows from this moment is not just a regional crisis. It is a fundamental test of the systems that have defined international stability for decades. How did such a massive transfer occur without intervention? What does this weapon mean for the defense strategies that nations have relied on for years? And with the clock now ticking, is there any outcome that avoids a direct confrontation with consequences beyond calculation? There are no simple answers, only a rapidly narrowing window in which decisions must be made. And as this situation unfolds, the world is being forced to confront a reality it has spent decades trying to avoid. There are no simple answers, only a rapidly narrowing window in which decisions must be made. And as this situation unfolds, the world is being forced to confront a reality it has spent decades trying to avoid. To understand how this moment became possible, you have to look beyond the shock of the transfer itself and examine the logic that drove it. because a move of this magnitude does not happen by accident, and it is never impulsive. The transfer of 1,000 Sarmat missiles was not hidden in the way most intelligence agencies are trained to detect. It was not a small, covert operation designed to slip under the radar. It was something far more calculated and far more difficult to stop a direct state-level decision, executed through official military channels and completed before any meaningful response could be organized. That alone reveals a scale of confidence behind it. At the center of this decision is Moscow's long-term strategic outlook. Over the past several years, Russia has faced sustained pressure from the West, especially in the context of the Ukraine conflict. Sanctions reached levels never seen before. Access to critical technologies was restricted. Military aid flowed continuously to opposing forces. Diplomatic isolation increased across institutions aligned with Western interests. From Moscow's perspective, the existing global system was no longer neutral. It had become an environment structured against Russian interests. Instead of reacting impulsively, Russia responded with patience. It began building alternative financial systems, strengthening energy partnerships with non-Western nations, and expanding alliances that could operate outside Western influence. But more importantly, it searched for a move that could fundamentally reshape the strategic environment without triggering a direct war with NATO. That search led to a single conclusion: Iran. A heavily armed Iran, especially one equipped with advanced nuclear delivery systems, creates a permanent shift in global priorities. It forces the United States to redirect attention and resources toward the Middle East. It increases pressure on American allies in the region, and it raises doubts about Washington's ability to guarantee security in a rapidly changing environment. Every resource tied down in managing that pressure is a resource no longer available elsewhere. Every moment spent responding to this crisis is a moment that cannot be used to counter Russia directly. Seen through that lens, the transfer was not reckless escalation. It was a calculated investment, a move designed to reshape global dynamics in a way that favors long-term strategic goals. And once that decision was made, the execution followed with precision. The logistics alone were complex, but they were not beyond Russia's capabilities. The process began with rail transport across Russian territory, moving the missiles toward the Caspian Sea. From there, they were transferred by military vessels operating in waters largely outside the reach of Western surveillance. The final stage involved overland delivery into Iran, where the missiles were placed into hardened underground facilities that had been prepared well in advance. To mask these movements, the entire operation was conducted under the cover of large-scale military exercises. Satellite imagery showed activity, but it was interpreted as routine training. By the time analysts identified inconsistencies between what was expected and what was actually happening, the transfer was already complete. This is where the failure becomes clear. It was not a lack of intelligence assets. The signals were there. The movements were visible. The issue was interpretation and timing. Acting on incomplete information carries risks, especially when dealing with a nuclear power. Democratic systems tend to require a higher level of certainty before taking aggressive action. That delay, even if measured in hours or days, can be decisive. Russia acted with certainty. The West waited for confirmation. By the time that confirmation arrived, there was nothing left to stop. The missiles were already in place, integrated into Iranian infrastructure that had been quietly developed over several years. Technical teams had worked together long before this moment, preparing systems, training personnel, and ensuring that once the transfer happened, the weapons could become operational almost immediately. Iran did not receive these missiles as an unprepared partner. It received them as a country that had been expecting them, and that changes everything. Because this was not just a transfer of hardware. It was the completion of a strategy that had been building in the background for years, unnoticed until it was too late to reverse. And that changes everything. Because this was not just a transfer of hardware. It was the completion of a strategy that had been building quietly for years, only becoming visible once it was already irreversible. Now, to understand why this development is so destabilizing, you have to examine the weapon itself. Because the RS-28 Sarmat is not simply more powerful than previous systems, it operates on an entirely different level. The designation Satan II was not chosen for dramatic effect. It came from technical analysis, from experts who rarely exaggerate. What makes this missile different can be understood by looking at 5 critical factors: its payload capacity, its warhead configuration, its range, its penetration systems, and most importantly, the near impossibility of stopping it once deployed. Start with payload. The Sarmat carries a throw weight of roughly 10 metric tons. That number might sound abstract, but its implications are very real. It means a single missile can carry not just nuclear warheads, but also decoys, countermeasures, and electronic interference systems, all deployed together. Instead of presenting one target, it creates a complex cluster of objects designed to confuse and overwhelm any defense system. Within that payload, the missile typically carries between 10 and 15 independently targetable warheads. Each one can be directed toward a different location. In practical terms, a single launch could strike multiple cities, military bases, and infrastructure points simultaneously. This isn't theoretical. It is exactly what the system was built to do. Now, consider what happens when that capability is scaled. One missile can target an entire region. A small group of missiles can saturate a country's defenses. And with 1,000 missiles now in place, the scale moves beyond anything current systems were designed to handle. The concept of defense begins to break down under those numbers. The flexibility of these warheads adds another layer of complexity. They can be configured for different levels of impact, ranging from tactical strikes to large-scale destruction. This allows the operator to adjust the intensity of a response depending on the situation. But that flexibility is not stabilizing, it creates uncertainty. An adversary must prepare for every possible level of escalation at the same time, which spreads defensive resources thin and complicates decision-making. Then there is range. With an operational reach of approximately 18,000 kilometers, the Sarmat can strike virtually any target on the planet from a wide range of launch points. But the real advantage is not just how far it can go, it's how it gets there. Traditional missile defense systems were designed based on predictable flight paths, particularly those crossing over the northern hemisphere. The Sarmat was engineered to break that assumption. It can approach targets from unconventional directions, including over the South Pole, effectively bypassing many of the early warning systems that have been in place for decades. This reduces reaction time and limits the ability of defenders to respond effectively. By the time detection occurs, the window for interception may already be closing. The penetration systems built into the missile take this even further. Alongside its warheads, the Sarmat deploys decoys that mimic real targets on radar, making it extremely difficult to distinguish between genuine threats and distractions. It also carries systems designed to interfere with tracking and targeting technologies. And as the warheads re-enter the atmosphere, they can perform evasive maneuvers at extremely high speeds. All of this leads to a simple but uncomfortable conclusion. Intercepting a Sarmat missile is not just difficult, it may be functionally impossible at scale. Against a single missile, there might be limited success, but against multiple launches, the system becomes saturated almost immediately. And against a large coordinated strike, the mathematics no longer work in favor of defense. This is why the current situation is so serious. Because what now exists is not just a larger arsenal, but a capability that undermines the very concept of protection. And as this reality sets in, the focus begins to shift from technology to decision-making. Because the next phase of this crisis is no longer about what these weapons can do, but about how nations respond to the fact that they exist. This is where Israel's 48-hour ultimatum comes into sharp focus. 11 words. Iran has 48 hours to stand down or face total destruction. On the surface, it reads like a blunt, decisive statement, but the operational reality behind it is anything but simple. Israel is now facing a scenario for which no historical precedent fully prepares it. The missiles are already in place, fully integrated, and operational within hardened Iranian facilities. The clock ticking down is not just a countdown. It is a pressure cooker forcing decisions under extreme uncertainty. What does stand down actually mean? It cannot mean returning the missiles to Russia. Physically reversing the transfer is impossible within such a short timeline. At minimum, it could mean taking them off operational alert, but verifying that would require intrusive inspections that Iran is politically and strategically unwilling to accept. At maximum, it implies some level of strategic disarmament, something no Iranian leadership could endorse without risking internal collapse. The ultimatum is therefore more a psychological tool than a practical demand, but even that carries enormous weight and risk. Iran responded within hours, deliberately choosing a public forum for its reply. A statement from the Supreme Leader's office made clear, Iran acknowledges no external ultimatum. Its strategic deterrent is sovereign. The implicit message is simple but chilling. Any attempt to neutralize this threat militarily would trigger a calibrated counterstrike against the aggressor. The clock is running, and every player, Tel Aviv, Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and capitals worldwide, is aware that the moment of decision is approaching. Israel must weigh a strike against 1,000 nuclear-capable ICBMs dispersed across underground facilities in multiple provinces. The scale of such an operation is almost inconceivable. To degrade Iran's Sarmat capability significantly, Israel would need hundreds of sorties, extensive use of bunker-penetrating munitions, and sustained coordination with American intelligence and operational support. Yet, even with near-perfect execution, surviving missiles would almost certainly be launched in retaliation. Israel's own territory, its population centers, and critical infrastructure would be at risk. The calculation is brutal. No strike guarantees safety. The strategic balance is now fundamentally asymmetrical. Iran holds the power to destroy with impunity, while Israel faces a near-zero probability of fully neutralizing the threat. And yet, doing nothing is equally consequential. Should the ultimatum expire without action, Israel signals that even the most extreme red lines can be deterred. Its deterrence credibility erodes, and adversaries in the region update their assumptions about what Israel will or will not do. The Samson option, Israel's ultimate deterrent, becomes compromised not because of a failed strike, but because the ability to threaten decisively is now in doubt. The 8-hour ultimatum becomes a public expression of desperation rather than a tool of strategic leverage. Washington's posture complicates matters further. The official U.S. response emphasized diplomacy and de-escalation, refraining from endorsing military action or threatening Russia. The message is clear. America will not intervene militarily on the timeline Israel faces. This leaves Israel politically isolated at the exact moment the stakes are existential. The credibility of alliances, the limits of support, and the future of regional deterrence are all under intense scrutiny. Israel is forced to make choices without the safety net of guaranteed allied support. The broader implication is that the transfer has exposed a fundamental weakness in global strategic architecture. Deterrence, long considered the bedrock of stability, has now been tested and found vulnerable. When the capability exists to act decisively without immediate counterforce, the calculus shifts from controlled escalation to survival instincts. Strategic stability. The idea that red lines prevent action has been undermined. The ripple effects are global. Every nation with nuclear aspirations or regional ambitions will observe, evaluate, and adapt. The rules that once governed behavior are no longer dependable. In essence, Israel's 8-hour clock is not just a timer. It is a measure of strategic fragility in a world where conventional deterrence can no longer be taken for granted. It illustrates the near impossible position of a nation confronted with the full operational reality of a nuclear transfer that dwarfs all previous assumptions, forcing a confrontation with both technical impossibilities, and geopolitical absolutes. As the 4-8-hour ultimatum ticks down, the tension is palpable not just in Tel Aviv, but across capitals worldwide. Intelligence reports, satellite imagery, and cyber monitoring indicate that Iran has not only fortified its missile silos, but also begun dispersing command and control elements to secondary sites. The operational redundancy is staggering. Multiple layers of communication, backup, control centers, and rapid launch protocols mean that even a devastating strike might not cripple Iran's nuclear delivery capability. Israel is facing a dilemma that is as technical as it is political. Every possible military option carries catastrophic risk, yet inaction threatens strategic credibility. Behind closed doors, Israeli decision makers are running simulations of every possible scenario. Some planners suggest a preemptive strike targeting the Sarmat ICBM's storage and launch infrastructure. Others warn that even with perfect intelligence, the strike would almost certainly leave survivable missiles, inviting retaliatory strikes that could devastate the region. Cyber warfare and electronic disruption are being explored as force multipliers. But Iran's defenses are sophisticated, including hardened, air-gapped systems designed precisely to resist such attacks. The clock is unrelenting, and every hour amplifies the stakes. Meanwhile, the global diplomatic stage is in motion. Moscow, aware of the Russian-manufactured missiles now under Iranian control, issues statements urging calm and calling for restraint and verification. Beijing emphasizes the need for dialogue, implicitly warning against unilateral military action that could escalate into a broader conflict. Washington maintains a public stance of cautious neutrality, yet intelligence sharing behind the scenes continues. The signal is clear. Israel cannot rely on immediate international military support, yet must act or be perceived as weak in the face of a rapidly shifting strategic landscape. Within Israel, the public is largely shielded from the full scope of the threat, but whispers of intelligence leaks and strategic assessments have begun circulating. Civil defense protocols are quietly activated, population centers are briefed, and emergency systems are tested. The psychological weight on both leaders and citizens is immense. The notion that a single misstep could trigger nuclear escalation is no longer hypothetical. Every communication, every maneuver, every decision carries the shadow of existential risk. For the first time in decades, Israel faces a crisis that cannot be managed solely through conventional military prowess or diplomatic channels. Iran, on its part, maintains a posture of calculated confidence. Public statements from military leadership emphasize readiness, sovereignty, and the capability to retaliate decisively if provoked. The subliminal message is unmistakable. The transfer of the Sarmat missiles is irreversible, and any attempt to reverse it will be met with calibrated, overwhelming force. In effect, the transfer has created a geopolitical game of nuclear chicken, where miscalculation could lead to unparalleled regional destruction. As the ultimatum nears its expiration, analysts warn of cascading consequences beyond the immediate conflict. Regional powers, including Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan, are closely monitoring the crisis, updating their threat assessments and reconsidering nuclear and conventional posture. Global markets fluctuate on the news, particularly energy and defense sectors, reflecting uncertainty about potential escalation. The strategic logic of deterrence, once the cornerstone of Middle Eastern stability, is under unprecedented stress. The principles that guided behavior for decades, red lines, credible threats, and predictable escalation, are now being rewritten in real time. In the final hours, Israel's leaders face a stark choice. Strike with incomplete certainty, rely on deterrence, credibility, or step back and recalibrate regional strategy in real time. Each path carries consequences that will echo for years, if not decades. The 4-8-hour ultimatum is more than a demand. It is a test of leadership under conditions where conventional strategy meets existential reality. History will remember this moment not only for the weapons involved, before the complex interplay of technology, politics, and human judgment that defined the crisis. In the end, the scenario illustrates a grim truth. Modern strategic power is as much about perception, timing, and psychological pressure as it is about physical capabilities. Israel's 4 8-hour clock, Iran's hardened missiles, and the world's watchful eyes combine to create a scenario where the slightest miscalculation could cascade into catastrophe. Every decision, every delay, every signal matters. The transfer of the Sarmat missiles is not just a military event, it is a turning point in the global balance of nuclear strategy, a lesson in fragility, and a stark reminder that in the nuclear age, the margin for error is virtually non-existent.